So welcome. I'm very happy to have you here. Very excited to chat with you. I think that, I could say a bunch of things, but I would rather have you say who you are, kind of the whole big spiel about yourself.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, what's my spiel?
Yeah.
My name is Felly. I am from just outside of Vancouver in Canada, and I basically knew my entire life I didn't want to live in Canada.
Mm.
Um, a good thing about Canada is that the country is bilingual, and so I went to school in French.
Mm.
My mom was a French teacher, so it like was not an option.
Yeah.
Despite me fighting my entire life, saying I will never use this language. I will
Yeah.
never go to France. I don't like it. I now
Yeah.
fast forward, am married to a Frenchman and live in France and speak French every day. So like,
Hmm.
joke's on me.
Yes.
I wanted to travel my whole life, and I took my first solo trip at 17. I went to Germany and I said to my parents, like, I got money from working. I'm gonna go spend Christmas with my friends in Germany.
Mm.
And I left for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And then I did 3 months in backpacking Europe. I did a working holiday visa in Australia. I backpacked Southeast Asia. I lived in Mexico. Now I live in France. So like
Mm.
traveling was always where I wanted to end up. And part of that is speaking other languages. I
Yeah.
tried to learn German, which is very difficult, not a Latin language.
Yeah.
But I spent like 2, 3 years trying to learn German.
Yeah.
I think I've lost it all. Yeah, I'm like, I'll leave it there. We can continue.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's fascinating and more fascinating that you happen to be not currently, but when I'm in France, you're not too far from me. And as someone who was also, I didn't have the same background, but I did say, like, oh my goodness, if there's one language I'm never going to learn and I'm never going to, like, a country I'm never going to live in, it's probably France. Okay, yeah, so like same situation, like now
Mm.
married to a French man, now needing, like, it's beyond just speaking it every day. It's like totally inside of, French, like personal life, family life, all that stuff. And I'm like, look at me. You know what I mean? Like I was not my ancestors did not think I would be doing this. And
Yeah.
so I'm just like,
I think my
oh
mom
my.
knew. I did
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so tell me a little bit about her, and I guess we can kind of go into early experiences with the language, with the culture, or language overall. She was a teacher for French language in schools, in for adults, for kids.
Primary schools.
Mm,
So she got her teaching degree and she did 1 semester in Quebec. I
mm,
think she did like her final semester in Quebec. And then she ended up doing a year as an au pair in France because
mm,
she didn't like Quebec anymore. And basically, she told me like her boyfriend left her for the girl she didn't like. So she was
oh
like,
no.
I'm gonna go to France.
Oh
And
no.
I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, I understand that. That sounds like something I would do.
Yeah.
Um, and so then she came back, and because of her level of French language, and they're always looking for French teachers in BC, where I'm from, because we're the farthest part from Quebec. Like,
Mm, yeah.
it's like as a country, it's mandatory for there to be a level of French in school. And so if you have French, like you basically can always get a job as a teacher
Mm,
in BC at least. I don't know about
mm,
the other half of Canada. But
mm,
yeah, so she was a music teacher, but that was less in demand than being a French teacher.
mm,
And when I was a kid, she actually taught at my school from kindergarten till grade 3 as the music teacher.
mm,
We did music in French with her. And then,
mm.
of course, with the English classes, she did music in English.
Yeah.
And she would, substitute for English teachers who didn't have a level of French. And then she went and became a principal in a French immersion school.
Wow.
So she still is very like proud of speaking French, loves the language,
Hmm.
loves the culture,
Hmm.
loves it all.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how do you feel about it? How do you feel? I guess it was, you said you didn't have a choice. It kind of seems that
Mm.
way, right? So it was kind of just like this exposure. Yeah. What are your feelings on this?
I'm like, I don't have kids, but
Yeah.
I can say as someone who was a teenager, I don't think we appreciate what's in front of us, you
Uh,
know? So
yeah.
like me as a teenager, I basically like from age 15, the level of French that we have as immersion kids is the same level as someone graduating, so someone who's 18, if not higher. So you
Mm,
can actually challenge
mm,
the what's the word? Like the fluency test. Like you take a test at the end of school to say like I'm
mm,
fluent in French. When
mm-hmm.
you're 15, grade 9, you can take a test that challenges that
Ah,
because our level's already so much higher than
oh,
what they
interesting.
learn as non-immersion kids.
Yeah.
And so from 15, I was like, I don't want to be immersion anymore. I don't want to be immersion
Mm,
anymore. I'm done. Like it's just it's harder. It's a higher level, right? Like the people
mm-hmm.
who are taking regular French classes are beginners where
Yeah.
we've been speaking French since age
Mm,
5. So
yeah.
we're doing 10-minute long speeches, we're doing social studies in French. Some schools have science in French. It's just like I don't I don't I
Yeah.
don't want to write essays in French. I don't even want to write essays in English,
You're
you
like, I'm
know?
done with this. This is, thank you. Like, we're done.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
like, I got the level
Yeah.
that the government requires you to have to
Mm,
work a job in French.
mm,
Let me be done.
yeah.
And by grade 11, I did grade 11 and then I stopped. I didn't do my final year because
Mm.
my mom kept being like, "No, you need it. You'll thank me. You'll go to France and you'll be an au pair and it'll be the best time of
Oh.
your life." And I was like, "I don't like kids. I'm
Mm.
not gonna go be an au pair. I'm not gonna take care of someone's kids when I don't like
Yeah.
having kids around me."
I see.
Anyways, so
Yeah.
I did actually get to stop taking French before my final year, and I
Mm.
did challenge the test, and I got 95% because we had a level higher than the people who are learning French when you're
Right.
immersion.
Right.
And then I proceeded to not speak French. Ooh, I don't know. When did I go to Australia? 2017, so 5 years. 5 years
Mm.
I didn't speak French after leaving school until
Yeah.
I ended up in Australia doing farm work with a bunch of French people who didn't speak English.
Oh my God.
And I was like, okay, let me like pull this out of a
Yeah.
hat.
Yeah. You can't write this, like the universe is just like, all right, you want to escape this? Too late. Like,
Yeah,
like
yeah. They're
gonna
like,
just
let me
drop some
just
French
like,
people
oh,
to
I mean,
you.
if you're traveling, you're gonna run into French people, and
Yeah.
like I find it's almost like the three like Mediterranean countries of
Mm.
Italians, Spanish,
Mm.
and French that they
Hmm.
will, especially in Australia, like stick in groups
Mm.
and speak their language.
Hmm.
And I know like obviously if you've traveled a lot, you'll see like northern European countries have way high levels of English
Yeah.
and like southern
Yeah.
France, Spain,
Yeah.
Italy,
Yeah. Yeah.
their English levels are nothing compared to like
Yeah.
what we see from Germans and from
Yeah.
Scandinavians. And
Yeah.
so I'd always end up pulling out my French because you just can't get anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of people are surprised because Germany is right next to France.
France.
Switzerland's also next to France. I do think it's a little different in Switzerland because they are so just multilingual as a
Hmm.
society. But yeah, people are like, wait, like I thought Germany was like way up and or way over on the other side of the continent. I'm like, no, it's like right next door. Yeah, you cross the
Like France
border
is
and like
pretty big for a
it's
European
different.
country.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry for it. Yeah, I think a discussion for a different time
Yeah.
how country sizes were drawn on maps, but it's a whole other thing. Yeah. So tell me about Australia. Where were you?
So I flew into Brisbane
Okay.
and I backpacked up the East Coast to
Mm,
Cairns. And then I flew to Sydney, lived outside of Sydney for 5 months.
mm,
And then I don't know, road tripped, I guess,
mm,
to do my farm work. So in Australia, if you do a working holiday visa and you want a second year, you have to do 88 days of farm work to be
mm,
able to renew for a second year. I knew I wanted a second year.
mm,
So I had found a dairy farm in the middle of nowhere in New South Wales, which is the state that Sydney is in. It was like inland, I don't know, like 7, 8 hours from the coast. It was awful. I lasted 8 days.
What?
I would also like to point out that I was a vegetarian for 10 years, so like working on a dairy farm was
Wow.
not it.
Yeah. That's intense. That's like you threw yourself completely in.
Yeah, there was like no cell service. The grocery store was an hour away. It was like me and this South African guy in this like sketchy house. My room had like an infestation of whitebacks, which is this or not whitebacks, white tips, I think. It's like a poisonous spider that if it bites you, it's like flesh eating.
Okay.
And so I'd like
Yeah.
wake up in the night and have spiders on me, and I was just like,
Yeah.
I can't do this.
Yeah.
So I
I
left on
wasn't made
another
for
road
this.
trip.
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually went and spent Christmas with a friend because I had a lot of friends in Australia from doing ski seasons
Mm,
in Vancouver and in Banff in
mm,
Alberta.
mm,
So I went and spent Christmas with this girl that we worked together like 4 years before in
mm,
Vancouver
mm,
in the middle of Victoria, which is the state that Melbourne's in. And then I went from there to the west coast to Margaret River, which is about 3 hours south of Perth
mm.
in Western Australia. And I did the grape season. Way better.
Ooh.
Way
Yeah.
better. You got to drink wine.
Yeah.
Like, it was a lot of people, like
Mm,
there was like teams and there was 3 companies, so there was like a lot of us that were like 20 somethings all in
mm,
the same town just to
yeah.
do our farm work, and like it was
Yeah.
a great community.
Yeah.
And
And
that's where
that's
I was with the
where
French people.
I was about to say, and that's
Yeah.
where you had to pull out your language skills.
Yeah. That's where there was
Yeah.
the French people who were like living in converted sprinter vans and just hanging out with other French people. My first
Yeah.
house was with a bunch of Italians, and
Yeah.
it was like 10 Italians. They didn't speak English. They only spoke Italian. I like
Yeah.
could not keep up. My Italian is terrible,
Yeah.
but the
So
French
have
people was
you
easy.
you tried learning Italian as well, or
Mm-mm.
how many? No? Okay. It's just you tried to like maneuver with your other languages.
Well, yeah, and it's like with Italian and then with what I ended up doing when I lived in Mexico is like you can kind of follow what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
I can't repeat it. I cannot
Mm-hmm.
do the Italian accent, especially because like I lived with a guy who was from, I think he was from Sicily, but at least he was from South Italy.
Mm.
And it's like they have the
Yeah.
rhythm, they do the singing.
Yeah.
I was like, I can't repeat anything you say. Like I will never have that rhythm
Yeah.
and musicality that you naturally have.
Right.
So yeah, like Italian, I never tried. Spanish, I tried so hard. And I could, it's like you're speaking good and you just throw in a French word. It's like my
Oh.
brain doesn't know the Spanish word, so it uses a French word, and I'll be like, that was
Uh,
wrong.
yeah. Yeah. But I think that's normal because it's
Mhm.
like they're like siblings or cousins, however we want to put it in the
Yeah,
family, right? And I think it's normal also, and it's why a lot of French people try to use French words in English because we do have
you have a
not just
lot.
cognates, we have a fair amount. We just say them differently, right? But
Yeah.
we do have a lot. It just sometimes, like for instance, the word cliche, I don't like. This is used differently in French than it is in English, and so I had to explain it to my husband the other day, like, because he's like, "But why can't I use like he's not challenging me, he's just like not understanding because for
Yeah.
him it's like a French word that we're now repurposing a little, and so I'm like cliche is more like generic and stereotype is what we use to say what you want to say in French for cliche. So he's like making all these mental notes and I think his brain is just not sure sometimes like do I do the French one? Do I do the French
Yeah.
in English one? Like where but I have to do the same. You have to do the same.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the word that I said the other day? Um, Mandatory, because like we have
Mm,
mandatory and obligatory, same
yeah.
word.
Yeah.
And so I said mandatoire, and
Yeah.
they're like, not a
Yeah.
word.
Yeah. I
Only
have
obligatory.
exactly. I have coined confusant because I think it should be a word. Tell your husband, we're gonna work on this. It's gonna be a group, group. What is it called? What do they call it? The working group, right? To create new words that should make sense in French because there is no word to say things are confusing, and it drives me I think really crazy because I've never realized I want to say this word so much and I can't and I have to express it differently. So between my husband and I, we actually use this word like a real word and c'était tellement confusant. Like I just literally like
Yeah.
I have used it and it works. And he's like, I don't see like we should petition the academy, like we should just make
Well,
it a thing.
considering that most words that end in ion were like Latin-based words, it's weird that French
It is,
wouldn't
yeah.
have
Yeah.
a
Yeah,
word.
yeah, yeah. There are holes that I've found that just don't like will never be filled by unless the
Hmm.
academy chooses, right? And I do think that's the interesting thing with French. There is an academy that oversees how the language, well, how do we want to say this, is allowed to be
Yeah.
spoken every year. Versus English does not have this. English can't have this, right? Like there's
Mhm.
no way
Oh, we
we
do
we
whatever
can't
we
even
want.
exactly even between Canada and the US. I when I speak with Canadians, which you're a part of this group, right? I really feel like, wow, we are so similar, but like I was speaking with a Canadian couple the other day and I forgot that I'm sorry, in my head, I forgot accents the same. Everything was the same until we started talking about healthcare. And they were just like, yeah, so we went to the hospital for this. And I was like, wait, I'm sorry. I forgot you weren't American. Like, I can't just go to the hospital for like, whatever. I've gone to the hospital one time. I paid that, like, I was paying for my medical bill for like 10 years after, right? So it's just social things, right? Not language
Yeah.
things. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like here living in France, I have to explain the weirdness that is Canada is that like half our cultural things are American and the
Mhm.
other half of our cultural things are British because we are a Commonwealth. Like I use measuring cups to bake. And I actually, for last year on my Christmas list, said I want measuring cups because I hate
Mhm.
using the scale.
Mhm.
And my friend who's like married to a Moroccan, she was like, like, where did you get these cups? Like, I find these nice recipes and they use cups and I don't know what to do with
Mm.
it. And I'm
Mhm.
like, well, there's always like conversion
Yeah.
apps and stuff,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and then my husband's like, oh, they use ounces. And I'm like, no, we don't use ounces.
Mm.
We use
Mhm.
milliliters. And he's like,
Mhm.
what? Like, who uses ounces? And I'm like,
Mhm.
well, we use Fahrenheit for ovens, but we use
Yeah.
Celsius for weather.
That's that is
Like,
amazing to me, by the way, because I think that there is a war. We can be honest on about this. The It's not exactly a war I created, right? I've been
Mhm.
asked quite literally, why does your country use this system? Why don't you just change? I'm like, do you think I have the power to change? Like, what do you
Do
think
you
this is
think you
a
could get a couple million people to
I know.
change
I
systems?
know.
Like,
Do you think this is a national priority? We have a lot of other things going on. So
yeah.
but I love that Canada and I often have to fly through like my layover is in Canada in order to get back to France. It just makes the most sense. And it's so amazing to me. You guys are like the hybrid country, right? You guys are like the one that it kind of like how your language experience, I guess. You didn't have a choice between one only. So you were just like, okay, we got to learn it all. And I don't know, you guys have my vote for like best, I don't know, most well adapted, most open-minded in some ways, like society because you the logic of like America versus, or I should say the US versus Europe, like all this breaks down once you look at Canada, right? Like
Mhm.
Fahrenheit, Celsius, kilometers, miles. Like you guys use someone made a chart online. You use everything actually in different ways.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not like, okay, we follow the American way or we follow the British way. Like we drive
Yeah.
on the same road as the
Yeah.
Americans, but
Yeah.
we use kilometers like the
Yeah.
British.
Yeah.
And it's like, who made this up? Like
Yeah.
we measure ourselves in feet and pounds and we don't use obviously not stones, but not
Mm-hmm.
kilos or centimeters either?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
it's confusing when people are
It
like, what's the rhyme to like, so you follow the American system? Well,
hmm
no. So you follow the
Yeah.
British system?
You're like,
Well,
no.
no.
Well, you follow both. You
Neither.
just don't follow all of one.
We pick and
And
choose.
yeah, yeah. Which is why again, Canada, like wonderful. Love the maple leaf. Love the simplicity of the flag. Like, a lot of things to love.
Can contest that it's a flag I can draw.
Yeah, that helps. Yeah. To totally switch us off the topic because I didn't want to lose it. I mean, I think we can continue, but um Mexico. Okay, so this came after Australia, or was it?
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah, so Australia and Asia were 17, 18.
okay.
And I did the work for my second year visa, and I had two friends' weddings a week apart
Mm,
that I was like, I'm gonna go to Asia, hang out for a bit, backpack around,
mm,
go back to Canada for these weddings, and I'm gonna come back to Australia for my second year.
mm.
And then I got back to Canada and I was like, you know what? Like literally arrived in the airport crying. And I was like,
Oh,
I don't want to have to repeat this where in a year when my visa's done in Australia, it'll be like, now what? And
yeah.
so I had already discovered like virtual assistant work, working remotely, and I was like, I'm gonna like figure something out. Like I don't get to leave until I have my own source of income. which is
Hmm.
how I ended up a year and a half, yeah, a year and a half back in Vancouver before I bought a one-way ticket to Mexico.
Yeah.
And I bought my one-way ticket to Mexico. I bought it actually on Christmas Eve, and I landed the first week of February 2020.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah. You already know where this is going.
Yeah.
My
Mention
plan was
2020
to
anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, my plan was to travel from Mexico City to Colombia. I wanted to go to Medellin
Mm,
and like spend 6 months there working because I see so many people talk about like being digital nomads there and like how beautiful it is, how great life is, blah blah blah. Anyways, landed in Mexico City. I think I made it through 4 cities before the borders all closed.
mm,
And I decided to like hang out because I thought it
mm.
wouldn't last very long.
Oh my God.
And yeah,
Yeah.
that's that's my life. That's how my life in
Yeah.
Mexico went.
So if this was around February 2020, you spent, I mean, how long were you locked down for? I imagine a while.
I mean, so I got to I landed first week of February in Mexico City. I spent about a month traveling from Mexico City to Puerto Escondido, which is on the Pacific coast, basically straight down in Mexico in Oaxaca.
Mm,
And I got to Puerto Escondido and absolutely fell in love and was like, I want to spend at least a month here and like get an apartment, hang out, catch up on work because I'd been traveling quite a bit and like staying in hostels and meeting people and socializing and visiting different places in Mexico that I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna like take a month to like breathe, catch up. Literally as soon as I decided that, I think it was March 15th,
mm,
all the borders closed. So I was like, cool, all the more reason to stay here because I was going to go to Chiapas and then cross the border to Guatemala, but that
mm.
border's now closed. So I'll just hang out here for a month
Yeah.
and go when the borders open.
Yeah.
The reason Mexico was so great was because where I lived in Mexico, I know Mexico City was very different, but where I lived in Mexico, there was no lockdown. Where I was, most of the tourists left. So it was
Mm,
like the people who stayed was it, like we were
mm,
it, you know?
hmm. Yeah.
But it was kind of like being in college, I guess. I never went to college, but like being in a college town maybe where it's like we all knew each other. We were all kind of in our bubble together
Mm,
of like nobody was coming and nobody was going. But
mm,
we'd like go to the beach, we'd go to the bar, we'd go to restaurants, we'd go to the market. Like
mm.
nothing in that sense changed. Like we were still able to live freely in our town.
Yeah.
You just couldn't leave the town.
Yeah. It's like freedom within these limits.
Yeah, yeah. It was
Yeah.
like, oh, like you wanted to, like, we had a friend who was German who wanted to go back to Germany.
Mm.
His flight got canceled 3 times.
Oh yeah.
And he was like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't leave.
Yeah.
So,
Fun fact, I was actually locked down in France during this time. I happened to go for a weekend and long backstory with all this we're not going to talk about now, but basically I really do think that played a role in me deciding to move later because I did not like the city. I did not like the country. I did not like how, as a tourist, right? And
yeah.
so I had no desire to stay. I was just there to see someone, etc. And then it was like, okay, not only is everything locked down, but what was it called? The travel ban, right? At that time, from all travelers, like all directions, etc., countries just imposing this on each other. And I just was there for like a while. It was like a few months, and I actually ended up having to request a special permission because on your passport you only get 90 days, right? So I overstayed that, but I got a special extension from the government. And I actually realized like, okay, I could do this so long as I find my own way. And I do think it actually played a pretty huge role. So let's go
What
back
city were you
to,
in?
I was in Toulouse. Yeah, so that's
Hmm.
what made me later on move there because it was like, okay, like this at least I'll accept. Like this at
Yeah,
least I
yeah.
will. I've scouted it all out. This whole area, like I get how things work. I get how, I get the local culture also. I see what the known unpleasant variables are. Okay, got it. We'll work my way around it, right? So, but yeah, so okay, sorry, to go back again. Australia, you said Asia also. Where in Asia? I forgot.
I spent 5 days in Thailand because I was visiting a friend, and then I went to Malaysia for a month and Indonesia for 2 months.
Mm,
I loved Malaysia. I spent
mm,
most of my time diving, and Georgetown in Malaysia is
mm,
so good. The food, again, I like
yeah.
would go to Asia just to eat.
Yeah, I know.
And then Indonesia, I kind of had like a love-hate with it. I didn't love Bali. I found Bali to be very overrated, very touristic, just like way too much.
It's very expat-y. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm,
and so then I went to the Gili Islands, but I went to Gili Meno, the quiet one in the middle, and I volunteered for like 3 weeks. And then
mm,
I went to Lombok, the island in like Gili Meno was like in between them. So then I went to Lombok and I renewed my passport because I had a you get like a 30-day passport, but you have the option to renew it if you get the paper at the office before you leave the airport. I don't know if it's still that rule, so like don't quote me.
mm. Yeah. This is
But so
only valid as of the time that that
yeah,
you
it's
experienced.
valid
Yeah.
5 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
So after COVID, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so I went to the main island, renewed my passport. It was so much easier than like what I'd read because if you do it in Bali, like it can take a whole month for them to get back to you, where I just
Mm,
think I waited like 4 days for them to like
mhm,
like you had to leave your passport with them, and then it was like
mhm,
4 days later I had my passport back
mhm,
with the like stamped visa in it. And
mm,
while I was there I was like visiting a bunch of waterfalls because there was just waterfalls everywhere and I love that. And then I took a 4 day boat, I wouldn't call it a cruise,
mm.
to what's that island? I want to say Flores, yes, because
Okay.
it's Portuguese name.
Mhm,
um where the Komodo dragons are, Komodo National
mm,
Park.
mhm,
And I went there again because I fell in love with diving in
mm.
Malaysia. So I went there to go
Yeah.
diving. And then
Yeah.
I flew back to Bali and I went to the north of Bali to go diving again.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and I literally got to my last stop in Bali and I was supposed to take a ferry to Java and cross Java before my flight back to Canada. And I met a boy. I literally
Mm.
had a like eat, pray, love
Wow.
mad love
Yeah.
story. I had 1 week left before
Yeah.
my flight, and so
Mm.
I decided not to go to Java and spent my last week in Bali with him before I got a flight to Java to catch my
Mhm.
flight to Thailand to Taiwan
Yeah.
to
To go back to
Vancouver. I
North
had like a
America. Yeah.
40-hour travel day because
Yeah.
of this boy. I was like,
Yeah.
that was not a good idea.
Yeah. This is not the boy that you're with. No.
This is
So
not the
yeah,
boy I
this is
married.
yeah. Just gonna close that part of the history. Yeah. Okay. But so then Mexico, trying to I always battle between language, communication, culture, like you know what I mean, traveling, it's all related. So I'm trying to also like bring back the language part, right? So
Mm.
you don't did you speak Spanish before you arrived? Okay, so tell me about life in Mexico during a pandemic as well, which, you know, could be good or bad. Yeah.
Like I feel dumb for saying this, but I was shocked when I got to Mexico City and nobody spoke English.
Hmm.
I was
Yeah.
like, major city. Like I'm
Yeah.
not in the countryside.
Yeah.
Why does anyone speak English?
Yeah.
It of course comes down to poverty levels. Mexico
Hmm.
City is a massive city with massive disproportion between wealth.
Hmm.
And so the people that you're coming in contact with, the workers in the airport, the workers in the hostels, the people selling food on the street, they're not the
Yeah.
ones that went to the fancy American schools and learned
Hmm.
English.
Yeah.
So I actually got detained when I landed in Mexico, my first time getting detained
Whoa.
because my person at the desk didn't speak a word of English. And I
Okay.
didn't have an onward ticket. I was like, yeah,
Hmm.
I'm gonna travel from Mexico City
Hmm.
to Guatemala. I'm gonna take buses.
Hmm.
And she just like didn't understand.
Hmm.
And she was like, what do you mean? Where are you going? And I kept like repeating like Guatemala, I'm going to Guatemala,
Yeah.
bus, like,
Yeah.
and so then I got put in detainment, sat
Hmm.
there for like 2 hours. I had the same conversation with 3 different people because nobody spoke English.
Yeah.
Like before they finally just like let me out and were like, whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and then I got to the hostel and the people working at the front desk at the hostel didn't speak English. And I was
Right.
like, you're a hostel. Like,
Yeah.
why don't you speak English? And I felt
Yeah.
like it was one of those like, wow, I'm like being so privileged, being like, why
Yeah.
don't you speak my language when I came to
Yeah.
a country without speaking their language?
Right.
But it was really shocking to me, I guess, because like in Asia, everybody speaks English or at least some level. And other places I'd traveled, like I went to Slovenia, I
Mm,
went to Austria, I've been to Germany, I've been to Denmark, I've been to Sweden. All these countries, they speak English. Like they have really good to if not like fluent levels of English,
yeah,
especially if you're in a tourist place. So like someone
yeah,
working in a hostel, I was like, shouldn't it be a requirement? But
yeah, yeah,
also it's like they're working in a hostel in Mexico City. Like,
yeah,
didn't I learn basic, hello, my name
yeah.
is?
Yeah. And just a note on that, I do think, I don't know for Canada, but you guys are right next door, so we can consider North America this part, right? I do think that media and movies and something it has given us the impression that in major cities, like that language is a countryside problem, right? So
hmm
when you go to major cities and you're right in the hotels at the desk, whatever, that you're supposed to be able to interact and they're supposed to be able to interact back with you. Uh, That's not only not true, that is not true. I think that that can't be a baseline expectation everywhere because the world is so massive and people
Yeah.
come from all sorts of backgrounds. And so I don't know, my personal experiences I think are definitely a little different with this because I did grow up with family on the other side of the world. So I did have to travel just to like go see family, therefore realized like, yeah, nobody speaks this language. But I also thought it was like a 90s thing. Like I thought it was just like, and this is from before and now after technology, like we're good, you know? And I lived in Malaysia actually for work and for life and was introduced to the concept of yeah, English is an official language of the country. And so therefore people speak even though they don't necessarily have the same relationship with it as I do. They do speak because they had to learn it and that what you're describing, going to other countries, you know, in this part of the world, you're like, wow, we really need to update like how we're seeing English
hmm
language in an international way because it is not just like in the countryside that people like it, and it's not only not fair to say that, but it's completely the wrong approach, I think, to look at the
Yeah.
topic. Like how can you expect other people to know this language if they've never like this is their country, this is their language.
Yeah.
This is like yeah, they work in tourism, but they also serve like a massive Spanish speaking population, right? Like they
Yeah.
we're the exception when we travel.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like that's the humbling experience I had with Mexico is it's like, no, I'm the problem kind of, you
Yeah.
know? And like I had a really good friend, actually a roommate when I lived in Australia who was Belgium and he had traveled South America and he had said to me, you cannot travel South America without learning Spanish. He's like,
Yeah.
it's not like Asia that they
Yeah.
have hundreds of thousands of tourists every day
Yeah.
that they all speak English. South America, everybody learns Spanish to be able to travel there if they want to
Yeah.
back it. And
Yeah.
I had it in my head that Mexico would be fine
Mm.
because of the level of tourism from Americans and Canadians.
Mhm.
But I wasn't going to the tourist places. I wasn't going to the resorts. I wasn't
Yeah.
going to the all-inclusives. I was in Mexico City. Like it's not
Yeah.
where tourists go even, you know, unless you
Yeah.
want to eat. Um, and then you also get that a lot of Americans or even just travelers, like a lot of people in the hostel with me, they had decent levels of Spanish.
Mm.
Like I was one of the only ones that had like no Spanish
Mm.
because either like a lot of people that were in the hostel with me had were finishing, like they'd traveled up Central America, so they'd
Mhm.
already been speaking Spanish for months. Not so many people were like starting.
Mhm.
And there was one other girl with me who she was Polish but had lived in London and she had just arrived as well as me,
Mhm.
but she was traveling down, but it wasn't her first time. She'd already
Mhm.
traveled South America, and so now she was doing Central. And so it was like again, like I was one of the only people who didn't have any Spanish. And
Mm.
you know, I could like fumble through it. I had some basic sentences from movies, from Duolingo, but it was really like my pronunciation. And to this day, my pronunciation is so bad because I pronounce things like it's French.
Oh.
And also, as someone from a West Coast, like a West Coast North American, I speak pretty monotone. I
And
speak
French as a
pretty,
language is totally flat. Like,
yeah.
I
And
mean,
it's
like,
like I end all my
yeah,
sentences going down.
yeah,
And you
falling
can't do
tone.
that in
Yeah,
a tonal language
yeah,
because if
yeah,
you
yeah,
go down, it changes the word. And so
yeah,
it's like
yeah,
people would say things to me and I would repeat and they'd be like, no, and like repeat it to me like 10
yeah,
times. I'm like, I'm saying the same thing as you. I don't
Yeah.
hear a difference.
It's the interesting thing for me as a Mandarin speaker as well is that so we do have the hardcore tonal languages like where it's
Yeah,
gonna
it's
mean
like one of
totally
the
something
hardest
else.
tonal languages,
Yeah,
no?
yeah, yeah. Spanish I do think is more I think it's more about stress and about like yeah, like
Mhm.
where you're placing emphasis. That so those as concepts and I took Spanish in school, right? So not didn't never never spoke it, right? Because that's what we do with our languages. We learn them,
Yeah.
we pass tests, and then we don't speak it. But when I went to France and it's just so flat to me, but I really feel like it's the hardest adjustment for me coming from English, Spanish, Chinese. Like these are languages where like you the dynamic aspects of the language make the language what it is. English has so much variety and how and I find it one of the most beautiful parts of the language. I'm not used to needing to constrain my output to match this like precise template. And it's I think one of my largest frustrations because people I like I've had philosophical conversations with locals about this and other expats and whatnot and people are like yeah but maybe it's just because like people aren't used to expanding their their ears and their comprehension to other variations. Recently did an ancestry test for my husband because he's like I don't know where my ancestors are actually from because nobody talks about this. um he found out they are all from the same like little village region that his family still currently lives in and he's like he
Never
went back
left.
5 generations and he's like they actually cannot understand people not from that region because you know what I mean like they didn't travel, they didn't leave, like they fought the war but like that was like like a few years and then they came back, right? So he's like literally they don't know how to listen to different types of voices and I do think that's what magnifies the accents and other types of vocal variation in the French language because people are like, oh my God, like I see it when we go to Paris or when he's like, up in the north, they're like, oh, you have an accent from the south. And I'm like, I swear, all of you people, you have no idea. Like if you consider this like a huge accent, like what do we say? In English, like I can't, So
Oh,
yeah.
I totally hear what you're saying. So I don't live in a city. I live in the middle of nowhere in the Lot Valley. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you are
Yeah, yeah,
familiar
yeah,
with it.
yeah.
On the what you were talking about before with the regulations of the French, like the French language and that company or association that basically
Yeah,
controls the French language.
yeah.
I saw an article that they were coming for the lot department because they use a lot of Englishisms, which
Mm,
obviously the French association is not okay with, but
mm-hmm.
like the tourism department here is called Oh My Lot.
Oh,
And like the
they
French
sound cute.
Association is like, that's an Englishism. It's not
Oh my
French. You need to
God.
change it to like lot tourisme or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyways, I know what you're saying about not understanding different accents, different regions, even like where we are, it's really small. When we were in Mexico, we met a lot of French people, but every time someone would meet my husband, my now husband, and he would say, "Hi, my name is blah blah blah," and they would be like, "Oh, you're French," and they'd say something in French, and they'd instantly go, "You're from the South. You're from the South," and they
Mm,
were like, "It's his accent," and I was like, "I don't hear anything."
yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't
I
really
hear
hear. I mean,
it, but
it's
it's
not
not
the
something to judge someone for, right?
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's never negative. Like
Mm,
people, I think a lot of the times, like Northern people would almost be jealous that he's from the South, but it would be
mm,
that they could instantly tell he had the Southern accent. And everyone would be
mm-hmm.
like to me, like, "Oh, can't you hear it? It's such a beautiful accent. You're so lucky
Oh,
you're going to the South. It's so much better."
well,
And I
that's
was
good.
like, I don't hear the accent.
Yeah.
But since I've been here, I will have people say to me, like, I can't understand anything you say.
Hmm.
I'm fluent in the language.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
open your ears a little bit, you know? But
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I've had multiple people be like, "Oh, I can't understand you. Like I can't understand your accent." And I'm just like, I don't know what to say to you because I'm literally speaking your language. Should I switch to
Yeah.
English? Like, I know you don't speak
Mm,
that."
yeah.
And I
Very
can
good.
see it like obviously with my husband who is learned English, learned Spanish. It's different for Spanish because he lived all over South America and then in Mexico. And he went to school speaking Spanish, and then he lived in Colombia, then he lived in Mexico. He spent a lot of time with Argentinians because they're everywhere. And so it's like he knows all those different variations of the accent. But like when it comes to English speakers speaking with their different accents, right? Like Australian accent, Scottish accent, Irish accent. or even like a non-English speaker speaking English or non-native English speaker speaking
Mm-hmm.
English
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
is like he struggles so much more. And like I remember when we were in the airport to leave Vancouver and someone speaking had an accent and he was like, how can that person have that job? Like I think it
Oh.
was a flight attendant. He's like, how can the flight attendant how can she be hired if she speaks like that? And I'm just like, because you can't not hire someone because they have an accent. It's called discrimination. And
Yeah.
he's like, yeah, but like their job is to communicate. And I was like, yeah, and she's speaking perfect English. She just has an
Yeah.
accent.
Yeah, and we all have accents. It's just
Yeah.
some are going to be within a range of, I don't know, like more optimal probability of clarity. I don't know like how to like
Yeah, I got
like
you.
yeah, like it just some will be a little bit within the decibel range of what we can associate with. The others will be a little more challenging for sure. My husband right now is being just in the Washington D.C. area. There are so many different accents and dialects, and even I code switch a lot. I go
Mhm.
into different kind of personalities depending on who I'm with because I that makes sense that like I was born into an immigrant family. I speak English in a certain way for professional life, but when I'm with my friends, that will totally change. And it's not
Mm,
just about slang, it's my literal voice that will change. And
mm.
he he can't understand me sometimes and he's like, "Honey, please, please, I'm not from here. What are you saying? Like what are
Slow
you?"
down.
Yeah, like break it
Yeah,
down for
no.
me. Yeah.
When we went to Canada and I was like with my friends, he was like, too fast. Everything's too
Mm.
fast. And I was like,
Oh,
yeah, of course, like if I'm speaking with other native English speakers
I
from
know.
my
Yeah.
city, like our slang comes out, like my slang comes out way heavier than I would use it
Mm-hmm.
naturally. Like
Mm-hmm.
in Mexico. In Mexico, we had a lot of friends that were English speakers, but from all over, right? Like British, we had a Romanian friend, an American friend, a friend from Ontario. And so it's like our slang changes between all of
Mm-hmm.
us. And so then I
Mm-hmm.
won't use the heavy Canadian slang or like the Vancouver terminology for things because
Yeah.
they don't get it either. And so then
Yeah.
like when we were in Vancouver, he was like, I can't follow your conversations. Like you
Mm,
talk too fast. You talk
mm.
different. Like but I see, I don't know about your husband, but like mine, when he speaks French, his voice drops.
Compared to other languages, let me think. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the first time I heard him French, I was like, whoa, like your voice just
Yeah.
got so much deeper.
Okay, the first time, so we met online and basically we had a week. I had a friend visiting, and then we couldn't find time to meet up, and so we were exchanging messages, and then we went into voice messages. And I remember the first time I heard his voice in French, I was like, okay, so this could be okay, like like we might find something nice at the end of this, like like when we meet, like it's interesting, right? Different, and mine does too. My voice, yours changes when you speak different languages, or do you feel like
I
you
have
use
no
the
idea.
register?
I don't
Okay,
know if I've ever thought about it,
about
but
it.
I've noticed it with him.
Mm,
And I know it
yeah.
with my mom because my mom puts on a Quebecois accent because she learned in
Mm,
Quebec.
okay.
And I'm always like, why do you speak like that?
Yeah, yeah,
And we
yeah.
had that conversation because in we got married in the summer, so like my parents were here and we were talking about like how as a French immersion kid, I don't speak with a Quebecois accent.
Mm,
But it's like we were looking at like the different teachers that I had, and I think it was less than 50% that I actually had Quebecois teachers. Like
hmm
some were learned French, some are from different, like one was Acadian, one was from Manitoba. Like there's different French communities all across
hmm
Canada, right? So it's like
hmm
it's only in that one part that they speak in that one way.
Yeah,
But then when my
yeah.
mom gave his speech at the wedding and she did her speech like half English, half French, and my one friend was just like, that's the French I know. Like,
Mm.
that's the French teacher voice that I know. And I was like, yeah, she sounds like Quebecois. Like, she was really struggling with the French accent and
Yeah.
like she knows French. She did French immersion with me, but she was like, I can't keep up. And I was like, look, you haven't spoken French in 10 years. Like, I understand not being able to keep up. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, remind your husband that there are so many different French accents and not just
mm,
we're not just talking native accents. We're talking former colonies that were forced to
hmm.
like integrate the French language as part of their official languages. And it does not invalidate. the fact that they speak the language because they were also forced to learn the language. It's like English, right? Like
Yeah.
if we were to say, oh, Manglish, which is Malaysian English, or Singlish, Singaporean English, which family in Singapore, it's like I'm like, man, we are not the same in this like in this whole identity. Like I don't know what you guys are using words, but wow, not in the same way. But it's like we can't seriously be like, oh no, it's not real English. These are what? Like you it was forced into these places.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's a different podcast now.
On that sense, I think where in Canada companies would be like literally sued if they didn't hire you because you had an
Yeah,
accent or they didn't like your accent, your way of
yeah,
speaking. In France, they actually won't hire
yeah,
you
yeah,
if you have an accent. And
yeah,
so that's where like his mentality
yeah,
was like, how can they hire you? And I'm like, because we
yeah.
don't discriminate.
Because we don't discriminate because
It's illegal.
yeah, uh, the amount of contradiction I see between like literal French society, hiring practices, like social interaction, whatnot, and what I'm told. But it's the law, like it's legal. Like we don't discriminate. There's no racism because it's illegal. I'm like, I do you guys not know that what's in the law and what happens in real life are just two separate things, and that you
Oh yeah.
actually like what is going on here? Like do I have to explain this concept? Yeah,
It was
we can
crazy.
have a separate follow-up podcast on all, like, you know what I mean? Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a whole separate topic. Okay, I'm gonna just round this out. I'm gonna bring us
Mhm.
home in this. Can you think of times, so you've been someone exposed to multiple languages, cultures, countries, like you've traveled so many different places. Can you think of things that you think in terms of, I don't know how much language learning you're doing right now or you did in the past few years, right? Because I do think for you, it's kind of been like, all right, it's coming back and it's leaving and it's coming back and it's a personal journey, right? Can you think of things that are, I suppose, not ideal about the way the industry is right now, the dialogue on language, on communication, like things you would pinpoint in those areas?
I wish I could remember the name, but there's some like I don't know the word, like influencer or like course creator,
Mm,
pretty sure it's a guy, who has this system for learning languages, and his system is don't try and be perfect, like with the grammar, with the all of that, and just like consume the words, do you know, and
mm,
like learn the
mm-hmm,
words, and like who
mm-hmm,
cares if you use the wrong tense or if you use the wrong masculine, feminine, because words shouldn't have genders, in my
mm-hmm.
opinion, as an English speaker.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was
You know, and
seriously, yeah.
I found that at some point when I was in Mexico, and I was like, this is so good because
Mm,
I learned present tense,
mm,
verb conjugations, and I probably took like over a year to learn one type of past tense,
mm,
and I never learned future tense because I was
mm.
not on my Spanish learning. So I would speak to people in Spanish and I would speak only in present tense,
Yeah,
you know, and people would be like, I would say yesterday, I am going to,
yeah,
you know, and it's like it's
yeah,
weird, it's wrong. But you know what I'm
yeah.
saying? And that's my thing. Like
Mm,
I am totally okay with like being unprofessional and like not being a perfectionist. I'm the opposite of a perfectionist. But when it comes to languages, I really, really don't like the stress of like getting the grammar perfect. I would rather you fumble your words. I would rather you called me he over
mm,
she, but you said your sentence
yeah,
over not speak at all.
yeah,
Right? And it's
yeah.
like with French. I like it's masculine and feminine. I could guess. If you ask me what it is, I'm not sure. If I'm speaking, it's just there in memory,
Mm.
you know? But like
You're
then if
so
it's a new
lucky.
word,
Yes.
sometimes I still get them backwards. And sometimes people will correct me and I'll be
Mm.
like, does it
Doesn't
matter?
matter.
You knew what I
Yeah,
said.
yeah.
And that's me as a language learner. And I that's my beef with the language learning industry is I feel like it's so
Mm,
rigid. And I
mm,
think a lot of people would get farther if they let go of the is it
mm,
le ou la and they just said whatever because it's like to you need to get in the practice of speaking. And so many people learning languages, their fear is the speaking. And once you
yeah.
can speak it and you feel comfortable speaking it, that's where you'll like pass that level to the
Hmm.
next stages.
Hmm. Yeah. I totally hear that. And also, if I'm totally honest, when I dropped the idea of gendered nouns, I got so much farther with my I almost said Spanish, my French, don't speak Spanish. Like I just yeah.
Both.
What's funny is I did actually learn them because I did so many years of Spanish in school, just like memorizing nouns, right? Like memorizing the gender. And so weirdly, I like you're saying, I do have them in the back of my mind for Spanish. They're not the same in French. They're also
Some of
because
them,
all the
which is
some of them
confusing.
are, not all of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also the pronunciation. So I learned how to make a sound between la and la that actually works in the majority of cases because I already have like a foreign accent on my French. I posted a whole thing about how I don't have an American accent nor a Chinese accent. I just have like a Michelle accent when I speak French. And so when you're listening to me, you actually cannot tell. It's like a weird psychological thing. You can't tell what I'm actually saying except that I said something that started with an L and you fill it in with the right gender in your head. And it's like the biggest hack. And my husband finds it so funny because nobody notices at all. No, he's like
That's
watching me
great.
speak, he's like watching me interact, and he's like, this is so smart. Like you just did like you got your way
Well,
around.
I'm pretty sure the people who are like fighting language being gendered would love to learn your system because I know when I was in Mexico, like I know there's like a lot of movement with the Spanish language of people trying to make it not masculine and feminine words and like
Yeah.
changing if it ends in an O or an A instead it ends in an E or it end like
Mhm.
right, like we see it with it ends in an
Mhm.
X but I never know how to pronounce that. But I know like instead of amiga or amigo, some people will
Mm.
say amigues, and that's supposed to be like a
Okay.
neutral
I
friends.
see. It's like
Friend.
yeah, people are trying to do it in French. I don't think the Academy will ever accept it, but people
Oh
are
no, no,
trying,
no, 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 no.
Yeah.
They'd have to
We're a few
restructure the entire
centuries away.
language.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, this has been a wonderfully enlightening and enriching discussion. I actually do think that your experiences are just they're so cool, of course. They're so varied, they're so diverse, they're so expansive in a way that I hope more people will understand that what you said about not being perfect, it goes, I think, beyond language. It goes beyond just everyday communication. I think it's also a little bit your philosophy on life, right? Like
Yeah.
when you think about going out and trying something new, it doesn't have to be as drastic as moving countries, right? It doesn't have to be like, and I'm gonna book a one-way ticket and get detained in Mexico because I had this wonderful plan to go to Guatemala. But I do think it's that mentality of like, just do it, just start, just continue, just keep going. I don't know. That's what I get from everything that you've said today. I just think it's super admirable and like I'm excited to get to know you better, as we continue talking.
Yeah, definitely. I know I'm
Yeah.
gonna be in your DMs.
Yeah. Yeah.